All right, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host Eric, and today I'm joined by Clay Surratt. Clay, how you doing today, man?
I'm pretty good, Eric, man. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. So, um, we connected. I wanted to get you on the podcast for a few reasons. Like, I know you through social, but you served our country in the military. You're super involved in putting out positive vibes, and um, I'm gonna make a joke about this later in a second. But positive vibes and a lot of content about fitness and about mindset and about martial arts that you're involved in. So definitely a huge carryover to a lot of my followers being in law enforcement and first responders. Um, but yeah, I just kind of want to talk about what life was like for you coming up and why you decided to pursue a life of service.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Southwest Virginia, small area called Galax. My family, though, is my father was a Marine, so that's kind of how we kind of came about. And he met my mother in California. So their family, my father's family, is from Cleveland on the
Mm,
the East Coast, and once he did served as a Marine for 4 years, they made their way this way. We ended up in Southwest Virginia. I think where his my grandparents, my grandpa's family's from Southwest Virginia,
hmm
and the grandma's from the Cleveland area. But yeah, so growing up, it's typical. We had a small farm. My dad wasn't a great farmer though, so so
Was
he was
wasn't
more
his thing, huh?
no, he was more of a mechanic. So the farming kind of went to the wayside. But he was a mechanic, and from there we just I had four older brothers, two half brothers, two brothers with my mother. Uh, and all of us, except for one, actually joined the military. So
Okay.
it's just it was just that time, during for me it was right after 9/11,
Yeah,
uh,
man.
and then for them, that was a big catalyst for them going in, which is pretty common for that time period. A lot of people joined
For sure.
during that time. So yeah, it was. Can't complain. I had a good upbringing, nice life, rural area.
Yeah.
I'm half Mexican, Native American, so that I live in a rural area, so there was some differences there, but
Mm.
nothing major. Nothing that difficult.
Yeah. Was there any you talk about that. I just actually had an interview with another gentleman. His upbringing, he talked about being Indian in a not very diverse area, an Asian Indian. And so did that provide any adversity or anything that shapes how you navigate life now?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, you don't, if you grow up around it, you don't really see yourself as any different than anyone else. You get treated differently in some aspects. I was actually a really good basketball player in high school. So against the other teams, it was uh, the crowds could be mean, let's say,
Mm,
but
yeah.
nothing too crazy. But for me, it really makes you realize that you are a little bit different, and that's not a bad thing. It's like not bad to be a little bit different. And I never looked at anyone else negatively, even though sometimes they did with me, So I'd say it made me more open minded to other people, because I didn't want to be treated the way that they were treating me at sometimes. So
Yeah.
uh, it's a little more empathetic, I would say.
Well, good. I mean, you have that positive demeanor, you have that positive message in your social, and when we were messaging, and I said, "Yeah, I get these good vibes from you." Well, that's what I meant to say, but it auto corrected, and I'll tell the listeners to hood vibes. And your response was really positive because you're just like, what did you say? Like you're like interesting.
I think you'd be surprised.
Yeah, that's what you said. And I was
Yeah.
like, damn, I'm like glad that you're still talking to me and didn't like take it as like a
Yeah.
what are you saying about me, man? What the
Yeah.
heck? But no, I thought that was pretty hilarious. Sometimes autocorrect can get us into some trouble.
Yeah, no
Um,
doubt.
but yeah, 9/11. How old were you at the time?
Ooh, let's see. I was in eighth grade, seventh grade, I
Eighth grade.
think.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a little older than you. Yeah, I was in high school, but I mean, we all our generation, we all remember where we're at, and
Yeah.
how it hit us a certain way. And I reflect on that too. I took a different path to service, being in police, and it wasn't until later, after toward the end of college. But I think of those images, police and firefighters, and it was definitely something that resonated in me. And I appreciate your service, and I appreciate you um, putting in the time and the dedication. So let's talk about that. It sounds like it was a fixture in your family, a family affair. What was that like enlisting, and any big surprises or any big highlights in your time serving the country?
No, not really. I mean, I would like to say that, because of 9/11, I was called to action and I wanted to fight terrorism. But I think for a lot of people, especially in rural areas, and the reason why me and my brothers get into it is for two things. One, I say people either join because they're inspired or they're desperate. So
Mm,
inspiration or desperation. Um, where I'm from, it was mostly desperation, maybe a little bit of inspiration,
sure.
but there's not a lot of opportunities. There's not a lot going on, and there is the pull to do something bigger than yourself. But I think a lot of that you figure out later, during your service, and not really as you're joining. Um,
Hmm.
and really, uh, I would say the military shaped me as a man. I know it's probably not the politically correct thing to say, but
Well, I mean, I'll just interject, and it shouldn't be inflammatory, right? It shouldn't be divisive just for you to say that. I mean, we're in
yeah,
these strange times. I hear what you're saying, though. I just want to say that.
yeah. Well, so when I was younger, my family, my parents, my mom and dad, they did divorce.
Mm,
So, um, obviously, I was with my mother, so she had five boys, in a divorce situation, and Um, I was the youngest, so I'm the youngest. I was,
mm,
you know how it is. By the fifth kid, it's kind of like you'll live. Go out there and survive
uh,
in the world. You'll be okay. Not that she didn't take care of me or love me, but she
sure.
by the fifth kid, you pretty much know they can eat dirt and they're not going to die. So, uh, I
It's
was a
like the second child, third child syndrome. Like it just keeps going, right? And trickles
yeah,
down to, oh, you'll be fine.
yeah. So you know, she worked multiple jobs, hard worker, and I was a latchkey kid.
Hmm.
So because of that, I got into a lot of trouble as a young kid. A lot of run-ins with police officers, and a couple DUIs before I was 18. I was trouble. I was a
Mm,
handful. So even with all that, joining the military, uh, it took me about 2 years in the military. I made it through basic training well. I enjoyed the adversity and being away from home. But the lessons I learned with leadership, um, what it's like to have teammates, how important it is to have teammates, to be relied upon. Uh, all of those things, I think, when I look back at it, as a grown man now, there's just so many qualities and lessons that you learn, if you come from a background like that are just they're just immeasurable, really.
hmm.
So those are really my biggest takeaways from my military service when I look back at it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that a lot of us recognize the impact that we had or we didn't have or that we yearned for, right? Whether it was, parenting situation, right? And I can sympathize with that. And I've shared many times, like, I think a lot of why I came to police work was trying to find myself, right? As a man, as an adult. It was, lacking some male role modelship, from my own father. And so I think there is that kind of archetypical, draw sometimes where you're looking for that rite of passage, and service can be very much that for a lot of people. So, and I also like you sharing, especially because there's a lot of new cops or people that want to come into police work, that you had some run-ins with police, and then you were able to, get into a life of service, get enlisted, and really mold yourself and grow and mature and develop there.
Yeah, 100%. And now, not to fast forward too much, but now um, I work with a lot of law enforcement because the crossover between the communities is it's there's a lot of blending. There's a lot of very very similar aspects between the two, and for me, the biggest part to that is, you know, and I kind of talk about this in some of the groups that train, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. One of them
Mm-hmm.
is called the Legion Project. Is I think that living a life with the gun, right? And I say that openly because you could say, the sword if you want to put like the warrior aspect to it.
Yeah.
But when you wake up every day and you have to put on a weapon, there's a psychological component to that is heavy, even if people don't like realize it or want to acknowledge it. It's the same in
Yeah.
military service. I remember when I got back from Afghanistan, there were days or nights where you would have like we call them mini freakouts where you're like, oh, where's my
Mm.
rifle? And you're like,
Mm.
oh yeah, that's right. I'm not even in Afghanistan. I don't have a rifle.
Yeah.
But I try to relate that to, being a police officer where you wake up day in and day out and you have to put on a weapon. And
Mm-hmm.
psychologically that's heavy. Like that's a
Yeah.
heavy burden to carry. And without, finding a way to I don't like to use cope because that's like there's like implications there of
Sure.
mental uh, issues or any of that, but without finding healthy ways to digest that kind of lifestyle, I think it can be heavy, and
Yeah.
I think it's heavy for soldiers, and I think it may be even more heavy for law enforcement because you're like in the civilian population and kind of living that life. So it's I just feel it's really difficult, but that crossover is very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're cut from the same cloth. First responders and people that we're signing up for something that's arduous, something that's dangerous. It takes a certain kind of person. I'd put medics and firefighters in there too. As much as we like to clown on firefighters in the police service, but no, I appreciate bringing those things up because very much so. We get indoctrinated and we get acclimated to this culture, and it's not normal. You don't grow up with it unless you really truly are in a police family. Maybe it's you're kind of in the shallow end, and then it becomes more normal. But even a few years ago, right, I've been in the job for 15 plus years, and
Mm.
my wife is we were just having conversation about something, and I was talking about how it might just be a mundane day, and she's like, it is not normal for someone to put on a bulletproof vest and
Mm.
walk out the door. And she
Yes.
was just saying, like you talk about how you're a target in a marked car, and that's why you always wear your vest, and you'll write up your guy if he's caught not wearing his vest. And it's like, because this is a real thing, and it's not to be overly dramatic, but like it's a real thing. And so you think about that, and you're like, okay, like let's center that and let's digest that. And that's a pretty big deal, right? You're wearing a gun on you all the time, right? And you're deployed. You are you're in your bed and you're in your bunk. You're not safe. You're very vulnerable like the whole time you're there, right? So yeah, I think that there's a lot of carryover there.
Yeah, and the burden of it, of a lot of the times, most people aren't acutely aware of their own mortality. Sometimes that's probably an issue. Some people should be more aware than they are. They do
For
some
sure.
crazy crazy things, but to be reminded of it every day, to for you guys especially to leave the house, and no one wants to think about it, but like it could be the last time. You see this person or that person. So to be aware of that regularly, almost daily, it can be a heavy load to carry. And post military service, the thing that I think I missed the most isn't running and gunning in cool uniforms and rappelling out of helicopters and all of that. I think what people have the most struggle with is the community of being able to
Mm-hmm.
relate to people that understand where you're coming from. And I think for law enforcement, that's a very similar thing where you have your guys and you have your team, but like, where's the community outside of that where you can digest and talk about things that, we have a gym here, and there's a backstory to it, but I train some guys up there, and they even sometimes are like, I love coming here. It's free for us, but sometimes you run into the people that you deal with
Mm-hmm.
on the street, and sometimes you just don't want to. Not that they don't like those people or whatever, but it's work is everywhere. That
Yeah, yeah.
so having a like-minded group of people and a community, it seems like an easy, like, no-brainer. Like, duh, Clay, of course community is great, but finding that outside of your work is not easy. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. That's why I think a lot of people turn to fitness or
Mm-hmm.
to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or those types of things. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are a couple things that you hit on, a lot of really good points, and a couple things popped out to me. One being, I appreciate your perspective, saying that, hey, it might be harder for cops because you're here in the fabric of the community. Like, you just live here,
yeah,
and I've heard that projected, or I guess suggested before, and I hesitate on how it might sound for me to say that, but even for my friends that are veterans that are cops, they're like, well, when I was deployed, I was over there, and then I came back, and I know that can be a hard transition, and certainly post traumatic. But for a lot of people, there's a literal and physical break between war zone and then home, right? Whereas a lot of police officers, your war zone is here still, right? And am I going to get recognized at the grocery store? And do I carry off duty? And how far do I live from my work? Do I take different routes home? Because what if someone's tailing me? And so
yeah.
it does add this other layer of, I guess, psychological vulnerability because of perceived physical vulnerability. So, yeah, I appreciate you kind of thinking on that a little bit.
Yeah, and to that point, it's the community part. It's you kind of hit on being in a theater. If you want to use the cool terms that we used to
Mm-hmm.
use, but
Yeah.
so the my education is in psychology and counseling. That's kind of where I'm going, even though that's not my actual job, but that's what I'm interested in.
Nice.
But the characteristics of being overseas, and you can compartmentalize what I have to do over there to what I have to do home. There's its own difficulties, because you go from Afghanistan or Iraq, and then you're one plane flight away from being a father, from being
Mm,
a brother, a sister, a son, paying your taxes and being in the household. And that immediate transition can be really difficult
yeah.
if you don't have the ability to digest what experiences you had.
Mm,
There was an old research article. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I might be able to send it to you once we're done. So if anyone wants to read it, they can find it. But
yeah. That'd be
he
great.
basically talked about how his question was how did ancient warrior cultures deal with PTSD?
Okay.
And his hypothesis was, they would march to battle and then they would march back home. And the path back home, they were able to kind of synthesize and talk about the experiences they had, because
Yeah.
it's no short journey, right? It's not an
Hmm.
airplane ride back. you're
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
walking. And so he was basically saying that that path home and the ability to talk about it was what alleviate. Not saying they didn't have post traumatic stress disorder, because sure, it's going to affect people differently, but for the most part, a lot of people or a lot of soldiers would be able to handle it a lot differently because they had that time to talk to their brothers or sisters or whatever.
Yeah.
So likewise, because law enforcement are in that community and they're working in the community, they may not necessarily have gone to war and came back from war, but to be able to digest what you just said, the fact that, do I take a different route home? Do I wear my
Hmm.
bulletproof vest? Do I get more cameras for my house? To be able to talk about that and digest that in the same way as a soldier needs to, it's very much the same. Like, it's very
Yeah.
much the same need for community that I think it's remarkably similar. It's just very similar,
Yeah.
that need to be able to talk about things and not be, stereotyped for, being weak or having mental health issues or,
Hmm.
whatever. Just like, hey, I think about this. Hey, Sergeant, should I take a different route home? What do you do? How do you deal with things?
Yeah.
Because the guy that I wanted you to talk to, or, you know, uh, suggested, Adam,
Yeah. It's to come for sure.
yeah, he's just a
Yeah.
great guy. He gives me a
Yeah.
lot of
We've
insight.
connected. Yeah.
Yeah, he gives me a lot of good insight. He's a real quiet, humble guy, but he has a lot of great insight, and a lot of what we're talking about, he and I have discussed, post jujitsu. But
Hmm.
the ability to talk about those things and not rely on alcohol,
Yeah.
or because I know that's big in the military, and I understand that it
Oh,
can
it's
be in some
huge
circumstances in law enforcement as
for
well.
sure. For
uh,
sure.
Maybe less irresponsibly in law enforcement than the military, but
You'd
uh,
like to think so, but
well,
yeah,
yeah.
for sure. For sure.
So without turning to those things, or the fear of losing your job because you have questions, that community can be huge. It really can be, to be able to synthesize and digest your experience every day. It's a big part of life for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit on a lot of really huge nuggets, so I kind of want to expand on a couple. And yeah, those studies and like the paper you're referencing, I don't know if I've read that one, but just the conversations of, hey, let's analyze this. Like, where did things spike? And something that I've consumed or material was that a huge spike after World War II for what the reason you're talking about, right? World War II was the last war where troops came back over, on a ship, from
Mm.
either theater, right, European or Pacific. After that, Vietnam, Korea, it was all playing, in mass. So they saw a huge spike, especially with the Vietnam War, in PTSD,
Mm.
with soldiers. And the hypothesis and the belief is because they didn't have that time to just be together for days, weeks, marinating, telling stories, that shared experience, and that's why peer support is so huge, and just any type of support group, formalized or informal. And I'm always suggesting my guys, hey, like after your call, you don't need to like label it peer support, but just check in and be like, dude, that was messed up. And then you saying that helps others recognize that they're affected and that was messed up. And man, I'm just tired, right? Just connect, right? So much power and connection with that shared community. But, we're also talking about community. It's hard to find that, right? And so I love that at least when I came through police academy, I know at least in my region and state of Washington, they teach to live outside the blue world. And they say, hey, you got a lot of friends and family that aren't cops, keep that, right? Lean in and actually be intentional to keep them close, because you need to be connected to your old self so that it's not just one little filter of how you see the world. And I definitely felt that at a point, earlier in my career where everything was kind of turning sour. I had a really negative outlook. I was around a lot of negative personalities, and that's really infectious, right?
Hmm.
um made another note here. Talked about the fragility of life, and that's certainly something that people that have been around death can appreciate to a different level.
Yeah, and that's again, that's it's not something that you would want someone to have to deal with. Like I obviously I have three boys. I wouldn't say like go experience death so you can understand life, but
Yeah,
there is a component to the best way I like to or the reference that I like to use is memento mori. That's that old Latin phrase
dude, I
of
have it written down right here. I was gonna say if that's an adage for you.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it's remember that you can die, and I think that's powerful. I think remembering that your time is finite and it's limited is what makes life as beautiful as it is. And sometimes I think when we get most people when they get frustrated in their day in and their day out, it's not that life can be difficult, sure, but it's forgetting at how fragile and how short it actually is. And even I know that, but I still sometimes get caught up in myself and my
hmm,
world and how small it can be. But like you said, when you remember memento mori, it's like, you know what, Clay, I've seen how bad it can be. I can see how fragile and how easily things can change, really quickly. So that gives me a backdrop, if you will, of pulling myself out of those moments. So as bad as it was, being in the light infantry in Afghanistan, I try my best to pull from those experiences the positivity of yeah, you can easily be removed from the world, but that's simultaneously what makes it wonderful. It's what makes your life wonderful. One time I went to it's called Origins Immersion Camp. It's Jocko Willink's Jiu-Jitsu
mm,
camp,
yeah,
but they had a Navy SEAL. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he we were all eating chow hall, and he had two hands that were blown off and his leg was
mm,
was missing, and he kind of just told his story, and I'm not going to do it justice, but basically he went through these periods of time of drinking too much, and he didn't care about life, and all these things, but ultimately he had rationalized and decided that he is going to live every day as a better person because all of those people that are gone cannot. And that paradigm shift really resonated with me because you see a lot of people when they're exposed to these extreme environments and circumstances, they can either use that experience as a reason to be less than themselves or to be greater than what they normally would within themselves because our brothers and sisters that didn't make it, we can live life because they can't and because they
yeah.
sacrificed, and that's a really profound paradigm shift, or it was for me anyway.
Yeah. So I think about that a lot, right? I think that, whether it's soldiers, whether it's cops, there are those that have trauma affect them or those close to them or even victims, just people that strangers, right? And there are people that internalize that. And I feel lucky sometimes that, I had a close call. I was almost blown up
Hmm.
um, and, I have I got second degree burns on my arm from a propane explosion following a shooting,
Hmm.
and it was times that my wife, my then girlfriend, was kind of bandaging me up, and she kind of broke down crying. She's like, "Man, we're gonna have this reminder of the time I almost lost you." And then instantly this is such a proud moment because it was so smooth, but I was like, or it's a reminder that every day is a gift,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it could have been over. But I don't know why I had that shift, and I don't know why some do and don't. Have you thought about that and how what you attribute your mindset to, and embracing that memento mori isn't oh shit, like things are gonna happen, and we got to scrounge up and hold tight what we have, but just to be grateful.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know, what the ingredients are necessarily, but I do know. So, and again, I can only use my subjective experience where I remember coming home, from Afghanistan, and it was this. It's very odd because my struggle wasn't what everyone typically thinks about when they think about a soldier. Like I'm, a loud noise. I'm gonna low crawl, or
Mm,
I'm digging foxholes in my yard. It was more along the lines of people want to tell you you're different now because you experienced this. Whether you're EMT, law enforcement, whatever, they look at
hmm
you like, hey, you're different now. Why are you so different, Eric, after that explosion? Why are you so Clay, why are you so different now that you came back from Afghanistan? And it's almost like a scarlet letter, A. And I remember feeling like I felt bad that I didn't have the negative reaction that a lot of other soldiers have.
mm.
And I felt almost ashamed of being resilient and positive about my experience.
Yeah. Do you feel
So
like that was a form of survivor's guilt almost?
I don't know, because it I feel that some people, kind of like you were talking about, like what makes some people, take the negative path rather than the positive path. I think that there's an underlying component of resilience, that some people are just more resilient than other people, and what causes that, I don't know. Whether it's the way you interpret experience, or personality traits, or whatever it is, but I do feel like there's probably a lot of soldiers or law enforcement out there that feel shame for being resilient and positive about negative experiences. And I think that's hard to deal with, to be like, yeah, I went to war, I went to combat, but I'm better for it. I'm better for
Mhm.
what I did. I'm better for the explosion. I'm better for the experiences that I had, and not worse. So I don't know if it's survivor's guilt, because you can have guilt, and then you can also digest that into what we were kind of talking about earlier, where I'm better for having had experienced it and lived through it, and now I have a chance to be better for it every day after. So I don't know. I wish I
Yeah.
had a better answer, but I don't think it's survivor's guilt as much as it is resilience. In
Yeah.
some sense. So
Yeah, and I love the topic of resilience and mindset, and I think that that can make or break anything. And I've had a lot of conversations with people through the years about resilience, and read up on it, listen to conversations, interviews about it. And I've come to believe that when prompted, some people ask, "Hey, can you train it, or is it in you?" And at the time I first heard that question, I said, "Man, I don't know." And then different people were like, "Man, I don't know. Like, let's try to think of someone that wasn't resilient." And then it took me maybe a couple of years, kind of just chewing on the back of my mind, where I was like, "Shoot, I wasn't resilient. Like, I wasn't a resilient kid. I was a shy kid, and I didn't handle, being inferior very well. I didn't handle not being a good achiever, or getting, good grades. That's what I was trying to do, to be validated and noticed, and that bred a certain flavor of competitiveness that's in me now, and kind of that perfectionist nature that gets at a lot of us. So I was like, yeah, man, I didn't handle, critique well. I didn't handle being bad at stuff. I share with a lot of people, I was a terrible cop. When I first started field training, I was a mess, right? And I just didn't know that could be okay. I didn't know that that could be normal and expected. I just expected to be good at it, um,
yeah,
even though it didn't, line up with anything I'd done before. So once I allowed myself the grace and the process and that humility, I suppose, and surrender of ego, it kind of all snapped to, and I didn't overthink it. I just believed in myself a little bit and just kind of handled it. So, and I think that that's a continued work in progress for me, is just trying to be more resilient, because there's certainly a lot of people that there's social media, and then I do have a career that I would call very successful. I feel very productive and well connected with my teams. I'm very grateful for this career. At the same time, I have to admit, yeah, there aren't times where I'm super confident in what I'm doing or the decisions I'm making. So I just want to share that because I think that it does take guys like you and I for the next generation listening in is saying, hey, do be aware of all these things and do be aware of your low days and how trauma can affect you and how these different things, like it's not all, yeah, we try to be positive, but it's not all, sunshine rainbows, in the midst of life and everything else.
No, and I think a major part to it, especially when listening to you, it's the ability to move forward, right? I think that an ingredient to resilience is not being stuck on what you could have done or what did happen, rather than
Mm-hmm.
who could I be and what can I do. Those are two very different, you know, mindsets to have,
Yeah.
on that topic. So to me, a big part of, I was very shy as a child too. Even though I got into a lot of trouble, I'm definitely not extroverted by no sense. But I do notice in people who I admire and who are resilient that they always kind of have this forward mindset. Not forgetting what you did. Because those David Goggins puts it as a cookie jar, right? You want to reach
Mm-hmm.
back into the cookie jar and be like, you know what, Clay, you did do that. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. But being able to move forward from the negative events or some of the mistakes that you've made in your life is something that it can be trained, sure, but not without an extreme amount of patience and effort. And patience is definitely something that most people have. Also, it can be trained, but some people are definitely more patient than other people, and
Mm-hmm.
especially having that patience with yourself. That's a very different thing than having patience with your children and those kinds of things. So patience and moving forward are two things I think are pivotal to resilience in some way.
Yeah, man, I think that's huge. And just to talk about patience as a muscle that you got to train, um, and then patience with yourself. I think that that's a huge theme, right? Giving yourself grace and not being so hard on yourself. A lot of times we're our own worst critic, and the negative self talk is off the chain at times. And a lot of times I flip it when someone's beating themselves up. Maybe it's performance based. Maybe it's one of my officers. Maybe it's a friend. And a lot of times I just say, hey, would you accept someone saying what you're saying about yourself to someone you care about? They'd say F no, right? They'd be like, hey, it's a process, and like get off their back, and you don't know the whole story, and they're trying, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, man, like you're not going to give yourself that love and that self love, and I do it too, right? So it's just it's something that I like to try to flip it on people, and then I think until you do, you don't really realize how negative you're being and how unfair you're being to yourself.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson's book. He has one of his rules. I can't remember which one. It's been a while, but
Yeah,
it
he's
says,
got a couple sets of rules now, right?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah. Some of they're good though. They're good. Little like metaphors that
yeah,
in a single sentence it can if you think about it, you're like, wow, okay. But he has the one where he says, treat yourself like someone you're responsible for.
mm, yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of
I remember
exactly
that one.
it's exactly what you're saying. And a lot of the times when you say that to someone and they think about it, they're like, huh, yeah, why do I treat myself, you know, less than I would
Yeah,
treat someone that I'm responsible for? Why would I be worse to myself than I would be towards my dog or towards,
yeah,
another person? It's like, no, you should
yeah,
be the opposite. You should treat yourself like someone you're responsible for.
yeah. You're a caretaker. It's like a different flavor of ownership because we can all just say ownership is my actions and what I put out in the world. It's like, well, what about within? What about the inner work or working in? So
Yeah,
I like that, man.
and that's what's hard about that the mindfulness and meditation and all that, especially for hard chargers. It's there's just a lot of stereotypes, of being in that world.
Hmm.
Maybe not so much anymore, but really trying to find a spot for the Jocko's or the David Goggin types of the world to be mindful, to do the inner work, and to
Yeah,
do it in a way that doesn't make them feel, you know, uh, try to use politically correct terms, but to not feel less than the way they want the world to perceive them.
sure.
Is
Like whether it's weak or,
Yes.
not tough, right? All these, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would akin it to, me, or maybe not you, but me, right? I'm 6'2", 210 pounds, walking into a yoga studio,
Hmm.
right? It's like, not saying that there aren't people that do that, but how would I feel? How would I feel about the
Yeah,
way they're perceiving me? Would I be able to sit down and really take in what's going on without feeling odd because I've never done this before and I look like this giant man, and what are they
yeah.
thinking, and how am I being perceived? It's mindfulness for the warrior types, if you will.
Hmm.
It's definitely not an easy task to undertake in its own way. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one more note I made was that just talking about living for those that can't, and right. So even though talking about the gentleman that lost both his hands, he wasn't stuck in a place of self pity. He was grateful to have everything else minus his hands, right? To have all these days to follow. Um, and I'll share. And I've talked about my friend that I lost, here at work, but yeah, it really flipped a switch for me of how I could show up better and be a better officer, be a better dad. And I wasn't a dad yet. I was actually you know, looking for some good vibes and connecting and, praying and connecting with him and, the universe when we were trying to get pregnant and like kind of hoping and failing and all that. But I was like, man, like I didn't want to be the outward facing cop. I didn't want to be the community cop. I didn't want to, do all these things. But he was really good at that, right? And so I was like, man, I saw the power of that, and I was like, if I can just take an ounce of that and make myself better rounded, make myself, challenge myself in those areas, and then I never would have guessed I'd become like the recruiting guy and like the social media guy, but I
Yeah.
see the good in it, and so I feel good that it's able to help people. Um, so I appreciate that, and I mean, I never would have thought I'd be connecting with you, talking about this stuff and philosophy and
Yeah.
service and
Yeah.
life and death, and I love it, man.
I think honestly, if someone were to ask me, what is the most important thing that you could do both for yourself and for your mental health, as cliche as it sounds, and why I spend so much time obligating my time to law enforcement, and to my jiu-jitsu community, and to kickboxing, and to veterans outreach, it's to help other people. it's the
Yeah,
it's the cure to depression. It's the cure to your sadness. It's the cure to your loneliness. It's a cure to your negative self-talk. Just help other people. Just do it. Like, there's no better medicine in the world than that. There really isn't.
yeah. I love that, man. And I get so many times because I'm in, this hiring role and recruiting role, but, asking people why they want to be cops. And a lot of it was, man, I mean, even before I was in hiring, people would come through, through my life or, kind of different channels, maybe family, friends, things like that, or friends of friends, and they know a cop. So, hey, talk to Eric. But usually it would become, hey, yeah, let's sit down, let's get coffee. But my old way was, and I think a lot of cops are this way, but they would talk about why do you want to do this? And then I'm going to spend the next half hour to an hour or more talking you out of it, telling you all
Mm,
this not so pretty stuff. And usually people are like, no, I get it. Like I want in, but
right.
okay, now let's keep the conversation going. And
Oh,
here's
okay.
what to do next. Just because it's a little bit of trying to preserve, others and, the real talk. But, yeah, I think it is like, where I'm going is that so many people say they want to help people, especially when I'm just meeting strangers and, they might be younger, they might be second career. They say they want to help people. I'm like, okay, but like how? Or why this way? Because there's so many ways to help people.
Yes. Yeah.
Work with the youth, work with the elderly, or just service of all types, and teach and mentor, and like all these things that you're training law enforcement to be safer, right? You're training community members to be safer. You're in martial arts and your fitness, like I mean, there's so many ways you can literally improve someone's lifestyle and their livelihood. That's not law enforcement. So like, why this thing? And that's what I try to get at with the crux of it. And I'm not trying to push people away, but I really want them to really flesh that out and understand. Yes, it is a unique role where you can affect things a certain way. So make sure that that's what you want, not just blanketly, vaguely helping people.
Yeah, well, because intent is everything, right? So, at the end of the day, if you're going to get a job, your intent is to support yourself and your family and your life and your livelihood. So, why don't you first try to help others on your own time,
Mm,
how you want to use your free time in helping others? That will really be the staple or the key that will let whether you really want to help others for money, or you really want to help others because it's doing you justice inside of your inner work or your mental health, or what it is. Doing it on your own time is very different than doing it, for pay.
yeah, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
that's very wise. It's like you've been doing this for 15 years, Eric.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm taking notes and appreciating everything that you're throwing my direction. Um, so let's get into what you're doing now. What is your day to day life? I mean,
Ooh.
you're wearing a lot of hats. You've already kind of given some people that don't know you, and they'll follow you after this, I'm sure. But tidbits into like your whirlwind and what that looks like.
So I guess a little bit of my occupational background. It's been really interesting. I got out of the military, got my psychology degree, doing my graduate degree, but all of that's kind of on my own time. I started work, when I got out, in social services. So I worked for the Department of Social Services as CPS, Child Protective Services. I worked
Mm-hmm.
foster care for the state of Virginia. And then I kind of moved towards veterans because I knew that that's like an area that I wanted to be active. So I spent some time as a disabled veterans outreach program specialist for the Virginia Employment Commission. Um, but the pandemic hit. Uh, I didn't lose my job or anything, but I have an older brother. My older brother Clinton. He was in the Air Force, so he's the smart one. Yeah, see, you got that. But
Yeah, I work with enough vets that yeah,
yeah. So
there's the labels and all that.
yeah, he was avionics technician, so he worked on, what we called in the Army the high flyers, the F-16s, F-22s. But he got into the renewable energies. So during that time, uh, again, on my free time, he was working for what is now the largest central inverter manufacturer. And when I say that, I mean large industrial scale inverters, not like the small ones that you put in your car, but
Mm,
100 megawatt sites, on a utility scale. So I, during that time, was helping him for free, for nothing, just to learn, just to help, just to be another hand in this like growing field.
mm-hmm.
And eventually he moved out of his role and I stepped into the renewable energy field role, where he moved on from, to continue his higher education and some other things. Well, not to prolong the story, but eventually he came back to the same company. Now I'm the national manager, so I'll cover the entire central United States over to the eastern United States. I'm just a service manager, um, and that's my work, and it's remote, and I pretty much do that all day long. But in my free time,
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved in many different organizations. So the first one, I'm on the board of directors with Together with Veterans of Southwest Virginia. Its aim is to reduce rural area suicide. So
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time, kind of interacting and helping them. I also am involved with. It's called FitOps, or the University of Health and Performance. It's another veteran nonprofit. They're of a larger scale, though. They are a very well organized, well put together nonprofit that essentially brings in veterans. They bring them to their campus at the University of Health and Performance,
Hmm.
and it has the disguise of being for a personal training certificate, but there are a lot of components that are for mental health, that are for
Mm.
sharing, that are for community. So they pull you in with the personal training certification, and
Yeah.
you leave there with tools for your mental health and for
I
building community. And
I
uh,
love that. I wish they could draw you in with. I wish it was backwards or all together. But I'm glad that it comes out with that, right? And because I think it's. Yeah, I know that you subscribe to that holistic approach, and
yes.
you're. Yeah, so that's awesome.
So the gentleman, just a little background. His name is Matt Hesse. He owned and basically built a company. You may be familiar with it. It was a supplement company called Performix, but he
Okay.
sold it and he went all in to. I mean, he's put every nickel and dime that he has into this University of Health and Performance, and he's been bringing in veterans. Uh, to basically do what me and you're talking about, which is build community centered around fitness, but it's really about mental health and
Mm.
being better post service. So I work with them a lot, just kind of keeping in touch and going to some of their courses and all of that. Then there's the Legion Project, which that's what Adam is mostly involved with. The Legion Project is a another nonprofit that basically does jujitsu lessons for free for veterans and for law enforcement. Mostly because of Adam. In my area, it's all law enforcement. So we have the local PDs come in, every Sunday, and we try to train applicable jujitsu techniques to what officers go through.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, just because they're, and I don't know because I'm not law enforcement, but you can just feel that in those heated moments where it becomes physical. If it's not something that you've experienced before, a couple of things happen. One,
Hmm.
you don't really understand how quickly you completely run out of energy and gas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You don't know it until you train it. You just don't,
yeah.
and this kind of helps that. And then the second part is if you don't have to, you probably shouldn't immediately use lethal force, which I think
Yeah,
it's like a no brainer. But again, when you're in that heightened state, when
yeah.
it's physical, it happens, right? It happens. So the emphasis is kind of letting these officers, some young, some older, just train and roll and spar and know how to, you know, 5 minutes is a long time when you're holding somebody down on the side of the street, right?
Oh
It's
my
it's it's
gosh,
a, it's a
yeah, an
long time.
eternity. Yeah,
So knowing how to use your body and to control a human being is just priceless, right? It's just a priceless tool. So that's what we do at the Legion Project, and then finally, Veteran Bushido Brotherhood. It's one I got connected with through FitOps. It's basically the exact same thing, except for it's all for veterans. A guy named Jarek Fry. He's a former Marine. He is using this. It's much like Weedify. There's some differences where he's holding the first jiu-jitsu competition outside of his home state here with
hmm,
me in Virginia, and the proceeds, and he's already doing it, it pays for up to 3 months of any gym membership, whether it's a jiu-jitsu gym, it's a physical fitness gym, It's,
Hmm.
Pilates gym. It doesn't matter. It's he'll pay up to 3 months of that gym membership, um,
Okay.
which is interesting because you would think, why not a year? Why not longer? The whole mindset behind it is 3 months will let you know if you love it and you want to make it a part of your life. If you want to
Yeah.
make it a part of your life, great. If not, there are other people that will use that will invest in the resource to
Yeah.
launch themselves. Um, so the last one, but not least, I know I said that the last time. I just don't want to forget about it.
No, you're good, man.
Yeah, is right here. It's about 5 minutes away. Is the Curtis Bartlett Fitness Center, and this one is near and dear. Curtis Bartlett, you can look him up. He was pretty popular on the socials. I think he had like upwards of hundreds, thousands of followers on Instagram. He was a veteran. He was also a police officer. He, you know, lost his life in a pursuit, and which is pretty big for our community. He was my childhood friend for many
Mm.
years. His father is a remarkable man. He, from that moment on, took it upon himself to build a legacy out of Curtis's name. So he ended up, when all was said and done, got a $2 million facility donated to him. He opened a
Wow.
fitness center. That fitness center, it's free for law enforcement, it's free for veterans. And what we're hoping, he has a legacy house, so it's just a regular house.
Hmm.
And what the idea is I'm trying to put it together, is for some of the fit ops guys or the University of HP, they're the same. Whenever someone comes in that is homeless, that doesn't have anywhere to go, but they're not so unhealthy that they can't do for themselves, that they'll use the legacy house as a launching pad to get their personal training certificate, build their community, spend time at this legacy house, get their self together, and then launch into the next portion of their life. And Sam is facilitating the the facility to do that. So that's
Yeah,
the last thing I'm involved in.
man, that's fantastic. So, I do have a couple follow up questions, but or topics, but where do you find the time, man? Because I feel myself a pretty busy guy, but man, you've listed off so many things where you're giving back on so many levels.
um
And you got three. You said you have three boys, right?
yeah, yep, they're 12, 14, and 16, so they don't need their dad anymore.
Yeah,
Not really, of course they do,
Yeah,
but
you
yeah.
set. I'm sure you set a strong foundation, my man. Like,
Yeah. Well, it's that whole thing, right? Lead by example.
mhm.
That's I guess how I find the time is I obligate myself to these things because I know it's better for me, because I want to help others, and
Yeah,
oftentimes, just like anyone else, I'm lazy and I have a pity party, and I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that. But if you obligate yourself to nothing other than the service of other people, you'll make the time. You just will. And I'm obligated on Sundays. I'm obligated on Wednesdays. I'm obligated on Mondays, but I'm not obligated in a bad way. I'm just obligated to
yeah,
be there for others. And
yeah,
as time consuming as it is, it helps me more than I could even let them know, because not long ago I did lose a friend that I served with to ultimately suicide, and I was thankful to have those obligations because it wasn't
yeah,
easy. It was a hard period of time to lose someone that close. So it's not a matter of do I have time. It's just I make the time because, like I said earlier, I don't just say help others because it helps you. I live that. I really truly do. So
yeah. I'm sorry for your loss,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you sharing that. And their legacy certainly, I know you've lost several, and so their
Yeah.
legacy lives on through you and your service, man.
Yeah, and that's it, right? That's what we got. That's what we got.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for your service in so many ways, right? And all these things that I've even learned about you today, where it goes back to that helping people thing, right? Like we're talking about social services, CPS, the foster system, and that's one thing that you know from working with them, and that's something that first responders know from working alongside or seeing these conditions, and it's heartbreaking. And so when we think about really where you're going to make the impact, I mean, everyone's got a soft spot for kids, as they should, because
Oh yeah.
kids are innocent and they're the future. So, thank you for making those investments, and thank you for doing that on your all your ongoing things. And I think the last thing I want to kind of discuss is what you kind of started talking about was just jujitsu and some ground fighting and training with cops. And I'll say, and some that follow me know that, yeah, I've always been, not always, but through most of my career, I developed a strong interest and passion for fitness. And I will say I've been in many scuffles and little struggles, some big, some small. But looking back, I'll take your compliment of wisdom and insight. But looking back, there's a few not so great ones, and I scraped by, and things went a decent way, not the ideal way, but they turned out pretty good for me and my buddies because of fitness, because of strength training, pretty good gas tank, pretty good cardio. But even then, even said and done, someone that sprinted regularly, weightlifted, did circuit training, and all that fun stuff. Yeah, you gas out real quick
Oh
when
yeah.
you're struggling with a very determined person who may be bigger than you. They might not even be fit, but they may be highly motivated for sure because they're not wanting to go to jail. No one does. And they may be high. They might be on substance. They might have mental health, behavioral conditions. And so, man, even at I'm in my late 30s and just starting jujitsu, a couple months ago, it's back to basics, right? I had good exposure, I just didn't maintain it, and that your yearly or quarterly or whatever your department does, it's not enough. And I'll just say, if you're worried about time, there are organizations like those you mentioned that you're a part of. There's Adopt a Cop. There's a lot of different programs that supplement or they cover your tuition or your fees. And then there's just also a lot of different things and resources and people that'll come together and just roll, right? So uh, please, please, please do not make the mistake of saying or adopting the mentality, hey, if I roll, I'm going to get hurt. Yeah, maybe you'll be banged up a little bit, but it might keep you alive. It might keep your suspect alive, right? You talk about that stress and that loss of the gas tank, and that you might be resorting to drawing your weapon. We've seen it, and we see it all across the country, right? Where someone is, in your heart of hearts, that if they would have had a little bit more training, if they would have had a little bit more fitness, that things could have gone a different way. And maybe even that's just stress. And if they would have slowed down and not rushed into something, or, looked at their resources. So not to soapbox it too much, but because of so much of what I do now is giving advice to those looking to join the career or trying to get in, they're so concerned about fitness and getting bigger. And I certainly was, right. I was a pretty scrawny kid growing up, so I know I wanted to gain some mass. But please worry more about ground fighting and some basics, whether you can get into grappling or whatever that may be. So yeah, just can't underline that enough, and how I wish that I've gotten into it earlier. But if nothing else, please heed my advice, and for what it's worth.
Yeah, 100%. That's and on top of that, law enforcement and everything aside, I really want to expound on what you're saying by stating that we will be better as individuals if we create our own adversity and we deal with getting better at something that's difficult. And nothing is going to be more difficult than Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Nothing is going to make you deal with your ego, deal with your,
Mm.
nothing's going to point out to you where you're short at your physical fitness, where you're short mentally, than Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I will say that for all you law enforcement guys, adversity will make you better no matter what it is. And you might get hurt, but you'll be a better
Yeah.
person.
I feel it. I had, we were drilling, and 3 weeks in, I got my calf got clipped by my coach's heel, and it wasn't even high speed, but whatever weird the way it did, just it hit like a blood vessel or something, and it swole up, and I was out for 3 weeks, and so I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I just felt like such the old man, right?
Yeah, I
But
feel you.
it's just part of it, right? And yeah, very humbling. That's actually, a lot of people came out of the woodwork that know me, that grapple or that roll, and they're like, "Hey, why now?" Like, that's awesome, but just curious why now. And a lot of that was I wanted to clear the mental clutter. I wanted to decompress in a different way, and I wanted to be humbled, right? I wanted to learn something new that I'd be terrible at, and I'm happy to say, and I'm willing to say, like, it's kind of freeing when you recognize and you allow yourself, hey, I'm ready to be bad at something for a really long time. I'm giving myself a long time to be terrible, and it's humbling, and it's not great when you're really tired from the workday at the end of the day, or you're really tired early in the morning, where it would be great to have a lot more mental bandwidth and capacity to focus on what you're doing, but you got what you got, and at least you're here.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I got two left feet and two left arms, and I don't know which arm's supposed to grab, but he's uh yeah, if I can do it, if I can surrender that ego, then you can too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Clay, so much. Thank you, and I want to be mindful of your time. We've been going a stint, and I'd be happy. I'd love to connect with you more, and with your buddy as well. But tell the listeners where they can find you, and any closing words. And I can, of course, and I will share a lot of the organizations in our show notes so they can better find them.
Yeah, sure. And I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot of, nonprofits and all this out there, and the market's oversaturated with them. So, you can support these, or find one of your own, and be a part of it in some sense. But yeah, so of course I'm on Instagram. It's Conscious Clay, so nothing too. It's kind of a play off of Cassius Clay. A lot of people don't put that
Mm,
together, but yeah.
yeah.
And a couple of organizations. A big one is University of Health and Performance (UHP). That's a big one. Um, you can always donate to Curtis Bartlett Fitness Center. They're always accepting. And again, I just want to emphasize that I get nothing for this. I don't get anything. I don't get kickbacks. I don't get money. I'm completely just in it for the sake of helping others, as we talked about. And yeah, final words would just be, if you live for others, your life will just be better for it. It just will. It's really all I can tell you.
I love that, man. Thank you for the wisdom, and you're certainly inspiring. I feel grateful for our time, and I feel grateful to have met you, virtually, and had this conversation. And I certainly look forward to continuing to see what you're doing and connecting in the future, man.
Yeah, yeah. Be on the lookout. We're gonna have a jiu-jitsu competition July 1st for Veteran Busito Brotherhood, and other things coming up for FitOps. So yeah, I'll definitely love to touch base with you again.
Fantastic. All right, thanks so much, and we'll talk soon, man.
All right, later. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you. You too.
Yep.